Welcome to Unit 2, The Histories of Writing and Literacy. In this unit, we're going to consider what happens when the past and the present collide. We're going to take up David Barton's view that an understanding of the history of writing and literacy is vital to understanding the current role of literacy in our everyday lives. We're going to start with an archaeological view of writing and look to ancient cultures and the traces of written language they left behind to help us understand what writing is and the roles it has played in the formation and organization of our societies. An archaeological perspective also connects the deep and enduring purposes of art to writing. Both art and writing exist to represent and communicate human experience. This is a petroglyph. Stop. This is a petroglyph, carved into shoreline boulders beneath the village of the Yucatán people, on what is now known as Quadra Island, in the Discovery Channel across from Campbell River. This petroglyph and others, along with rock paintings around the world, are representations of deep connections between human experience and our desire and need to communicate that experience to the outside world, using whatever tools are at hand. Oral language, a very important means of communication, is ephemeral and in the present. But petroglyphs such as this are more permanent. They represent an effort to capture a moment in time, to say we are here, this is who we are, this is what we experience, this is what we feel. Petroglyphs are considered a form of proto-writing. In fact, an early version of writing, but not true writing or systematic writing. So what is writing? David Barton defines writing like this. Writing systems are systematic, permanent, semi-permanent, symbolic representations of unique languages, cultures, and historical moments. This is a mouthful, so let's unpack it. A writing system must be systematic. Symbols should look the same and carry a stable meaning across time and space. A message written in one setting needs to be decoded using the same rules and signs in another place and in another time as well. For example, when writing the English language, the letter A looks like an A and sounds like an A or an A, or a close variation of this, whether you are in Vancouver, Hong Kong, or London. There also must be a range of symbols to express a broad repertoire of ideas and meanings in a writing system. Writing systems must also be permanent or semi-permanent. Art forms such as dance, theater, spoken word, and music are vital meaning-making systems, but they are not permanent, nor systematic. They are performed in the moment, and then they are gone, although their traces often linger in the culture, as they are reproduced or represented. But they are never the same twice. It's important to keep in mind that many cultures transmit their knowledge, traditions, and values through oral language and other modes of representation. A writing system was by no means necessary to sustain a culture or even an economy, as you will see in the documentary resource attached to this unit, The Empire of the Word. Perhaps the most important feature of a writing system is that it maps to an oral language. So mathematic symbols, while systematic and permanent, are not writing per se, because they don't necessarily map to an oral language. One does not need to know the language to know the meaning of an addition or subtraction symbol. However, one must have a knowledge of the oral language the writing system represents in order to decode it. In the image you see here, these are Mayan glyphs, a form of writing. To decode this writing system, we must have a knowledge of the Mayan culture and the spoken language it represented. This means we need to understand life in pre-Columbian times, 400 years before current era, or 2,400 years ago. This is particularly difficult because many of these ancient texts were destroyed in the Spanish invasion. The Mayan language continues, but the culture lost its writing system. Though, if you go to some parts of Mexico today and buy art, you may still find its traces on sculptures, bowls, and wall hangings. An archaeological perspective on writing builds us and leads to a more social view of writing. From a social perspective, we also pay attention to the ways in which writing systems are unique to the language and the culture in which they developed. There is nothing natural or predetermined about the development of writing over time. Writing is not a linear process from petroglyphs to the text you read today on Yahoo or Facebook. Some cultures developed writing systems and some did not. Some forms of writing persist over time, such as the Chinese writing system, which has continued with only minor changes for over 5,000 years, while other writing systems have died away or have become absorbed into other systems as the cultures that created them died away or blended to create new cultures and new languages. Different cultures and historical circumstances give rise to different systems. The death of some, the spread of others, the innovations and changes that come with cultural contact, migration, trade, social and economic changes, all the same forces that are changing writing systems today. So we can understand writing systems by asking, what oral language did this writing system represent? What belief systems, cosmologies, ideas were encoded in the writing? What did this culture need writing for? Who used the written language and for what purposes? Remember that in many societies, even today, there are rules around who is allowed to write and who isn't, and often what people are allowed to write. Many women all over the world today still don't have access to writing tools, and there's often many cultural mores and cultural sanctions against women becoming literate. Another question we ask in a social view of writing is what tools are available to create this written language. As we see in the image here, the tools, the clay tablet, the carving instrument, will define what the writing will look like. And in this writing we see the close connection between art and written language. To underscore our point that writing systems are neither predetermined or logical in their development, we come to the idea and the finding that writing systems developed independently in 3 areas of the world all around the same time: Mesoamerica, what is now Latin and Central America; Mesopotamia, which is now Iraq, Iran, and countries leading up towards the Mediterranean Sea; and Asia, China, Thailand, Japan. All these geographic regions had in common, at the time writing systems evolved, an increase in urbanization, in agriculture, and so land and property, more complex forms of social organization, for which writing was necessary to keep track, for example, of who owned what, where the lands were, where the water was, what kinds of harvests could grow where. All these records became important and therefore managed by writing systems. Different languages also use different kinds of writing systems. All writing systems use symbols that relate to meaning, sound, or both. For example, some languages use symbols to represent a complete word or idea, such as Chinese. Other symbols in other languages, symbols represent a syllable or part of an idea, and these syllables can be combined and recombined to make new meanings. Some languages combine these two systems in a logosyllabic system, using both words and syllables. The alphabetic system is perhaps most familiar to those of us who read and write in English and other Latin languages. In an alphabetic system, a symbol maps to a phoneme, a consonant, a vowel, or perhaps a digraph. For example, in alphabet, the A maps to the sound A. The F in alphabet maps to the digraph PH. Let's have a look at some of the early examples of these writing systems. This is cuneiform. Cuneiform is believed to be one of the oldest writing systems in the world. Developed by the Sumer people in Mesopotamia, 3,500 years BCE. That's almost 2,000 or 5,500 years ago. Each of these wedges are logographs representing grain, trees, water, and cattle. They map to the oral language of the Sumer people. In this particular tablet, we learn that person A owes so many cows to person B, and that person A has gone through the gates and used the lands of person B so many times. Notice that the writing form is dictated by the nature of the tools available: a wedge and a clay tablet, baked in the sun to add permanence. Much early writing, across the three geographic areas we're going to explore, were developed at first to keep track of ownership of stuff, as societies became more settled and agrarian. This is a later form of cuneiform. Notice how the symbols become more abstract as the tools change. This is a Sumerian word amagi, meaning freedom, and it's believed to be one of the very first words ever written. I must say here, however, that with new technologies we are able to understand and learn much more about writing and the history of writing, and so all these ideas about writing are shifting and changing really rapidly. This is a very famous form of writing, Egyptian hieroglyphs. The ancient Greeks used the term hieroglyphs to mean sacred writing, capturing a view that this writing was connected to spiritual activities, practiced by priests, pharaohs, and their attendants. A view as well that the writing is connected with power and with communicating to the divine. Hieroglyphs are made of a combination of pictures, logos, and syllables. It would be incredibly difficult for the lay person in Egyptian society to decode this writing system, and indeed it was the preserve of the priests and the pharaohs. This is an example of Chinese writing. Perhaps some of you can recognize the inscriptions, the logographs, on this oracle bone. The fact that this writing was done on an oracle bone is another example of the connection between writing and ideas of the sacred and the divine. Chinese writing is the only continuous writing system in history. It has continuous forms for over 6,000 years with only minor shifts in the degree of abstraction of the logographs. The language continues to change and shift to the needs of the culture, as with the introduction of Simple Chinese in the 20th century. Notice, too, that the particular ways in which these logographs are produced are defined by the limitations of an oracle bone. But later, as the Chinese developed paper, the scripts would evolve, and there are now over 10,000 logograms that Chinese people must memorize and learn for full literacy. This is an example of the Phoenician alphabet, believed to be one of the oldest ancestors of the current Latin alphabet or Roman alphabet. But again, we must be careful not to draw a straight line between the two. The Phoenician alphabet is believed to be the origin of many of today's modern languages, including Hebrew, Arabic, Persian, Greek, and Cyrillic. Many people believe that this alphabet emerged from the hieroglyphs and other later forms of cuneiform. Can you recognize some of these symbols? This is ancient Greek. Ancient Greek is believed to be based upon the Phoenician alphabet. Note, alpha, beta are the first two letters of the Greek alphabet, what we call the alphabet today. With the introduction of new symbols in the alphabet and the order in which they are listed, the Greeks created a new innovation to the Phoenicians. An alphabet is considered an efficient system to represent Greek and later Latin languages because the characters are mapped directly to speech sounds and because the least possible number of symbols are used. Now only 26. It's easier to master the symbols and then manipulate them when there are fewer to remember. The intervention of priests and rulers to decipher and encode writing became less and less necessary as it became easier to remember and memorize and use the symbols of the language. The Romans, of course, built upon ancient Greek culture in many ways. They also adopted their alphabet, but added the vowel as an innovation that many consider perfected the alphabetic language system used in English and other Latin-influenced languages today. In many languages today, there are no vowels written. It is up to the reader to decide what sound to place, depending on what makes most sense in the text. With the introduction of the vowels in Roman orthography, the sounds of the language are more explicit, and the reader makes the sound as it is expressed. This is considered an important innovation and a very exact match between the sounds of the language and its representation, or symbols on the page. All these innovations, as we said earlier, made it easier for people to master the scripts. The famous Greek philosopher, Plato, was very concerned about this. He was very worried about the spread of writing in Greek culture. Why do you think he would both critique the spread of writing and at the same time recognize its power? This question is taken up in the documentary The Empire of the World, which you will watch as part of this unit. The fact that literacy and writing is connected to power, to the control of ideas and to people, is one of the main themes of this documentary. Indeed, it documents the many struggles and changes brought about by new technologies such as the printing press, and by the power of writing itself to create and spread knowledge, and to control or empower people. The important thing to realize is that writing is always changing, as our tools and our cultures and our languages change. Can you read the writing in this text? What kind of text is this? Have you ever written a postcard? How is this different to the forms of writing you do today? This and other texts are a reminder that writing systems are always evolving and changing. Think of how this tool is changing writing today. To sum up then, writing systems are linked to urbanization and more complex forms of social organization. Writing first emerged to help us organize our lives, but also, importantly, to communicate what it means to be human. Writing systems are linked to differentiated social and economic roles. Slaves were not allowed to write. Priests and nobilities, and later bureaucracies, tried to maintain control over texts. Peasants and children were often controlled in terms of the kinds of literacy or writing they could or could not do. And even today, many adults are controlled, such as women, and people of different social statuses in terms of the access to literacy that they are afforded. This is an important point today, that many adults in our society do not have access to the resources for powerful forms of writing. This is a form of social control. Writing systems are linked to the nature of the tools available as well. How widespread was access to writing and reading materials? We always have to ask that. How widespread is access to digital phones, to computers today? Writing systems are also linked to the literacy practices that are possible within the values of the culture. Here, as you will see in Empire of the Word, religion plays a very important part in determining what people can and cannot do with texts. Bureaucracies and government have a similar role to play in controlling and defining literacy practices. But perhaps, and most excitingly, people are always innovating and changing literacies. We'll see this later in ideas in the next unit, when we look at how literacies are changing, how relationships and social roles change along with them.